So this is where you have to take off the back hanger. They're two 13mm bolts. One is on the back side here, and the other one is up top here. I'm not sure if I'll be able to get to it, but this is the bracket right here that you'll have to take off to get the back of the muffler off. So here are the two bolts you gotta take off of the catalytic converter and the rest of the exhaust there. 14mm bolts there that you take off from each side, take off the front of the exhaust. So the first thing I'm gonna have to do here is take off this starter. And there's two starter bolts and then a heat shield that you have to take off here. And then once you take off the heat shield, once you pull that down, you have to take off all of these sensors. And then once you take off the sensors, you have to take off that starter cable too as well to drop that out. So I got the starter off. And as you can see there, you can see one of the torque converter bolts. Once you take off that plastic cover, one thing with the starter, you have to take off pretty much all of the sensors here to get the clearance for the starter to pull out. And then you have to take off the heat shield with the starter on the engine block there, or else you're gonna have a hard time getting out. You're not gonna be able to get it out without that heat shield off. And then once you do that, you have to take the starter power cable off, and then you should be all set. All right, this is a picture of what you have to do on the crankshaft to turn the flywheel. And then always turn it clockwise when you're turning it here. And that's a 24mm bolt. It turns pretty easily once you get it going. And then you have the torque bar there too as well. So I have the exhaust off now, and I had two 13mm bolts. Did pretty good on them, except for this one over here. I actually broke it off, so I'm gonna have to grind the back of this off and possibly drill to get back through there. But it wasn't too bad of a job. I did have to heat the bolts, so if you don't heat the bolts, good luck. So here's where the drive shaft connects into the transmission. The 18mm bolts, and then you have a E18 bolt that you have to take off to take the dampener off of the transmission. So I'll be taking that off next. So here's the drive shaft and the differential connection. So I'll be taking those bolts off there. I only need to take off the 3 in the center there. They're 18mm, and the back nuts are 19mm. So there's a heat shield here that you have to take off in order to get to the center bearing. And then once you take that off, you'll be able to get to that center bearing to drop off the drive shaft. All right, so I do have the drive shaft actually pulled off now. And one thing with the drive shaft is you have to pull down and back in order to get it off. And then these bolts here, this is an E18, and I believe this is a 18mm bolt here. And then once you get those off, you'll be able to wiggle, or to get some play. But then also you have to take the center support off, and I'll show you that in a second. All right, so this is the center bearing for the drive shaft. Once you take these two bolts off here, you basically are pulling down, and then you should be able to pull back and then pull this way to pull both sides of the drive shaft out the transmission, and then also out the rear pumpkin here. So that's that. All right, so this is the side of the transmission. I've taken off the O2 sensor and then also the bracket that holds that on. I've loosened this up to disconnect it from the shifter, so I can manually shift this if I need to move if I need to turn the drive shaft. And I've already done that to pull off the bolts for the drive shaft. And then I've taken out the oil cooler lines, and then I have them hanging here and pushed back. So when I do pull the transmission down, I don't have to worry about those coming or getting in the way. And then I have them disconnected up front as well. There's two clamps, and they come right off to the rubber hose in the front, and then you're able to get some play in there just to get them out the way. I wasn't able to get those out though. All right, so I'm on to the next part of the job here, which is the center support for the transmission. And then I'll be able to take off the transmission, two transmission bolts that for the mount. And then I have these two bolts on each side that I'm gonna take off. But first I'm gonna have the transmission jack connected here and then wrapped around the transmission. And I'll show you guys once I get that set up. All right, this here is the transmission jack that I have and the setup that I'm gonna be using. So basically what I've done is I've wrapped it around the bottom. So I have this piece up here. And with this, I'll come around the transmission and tie that down. And the way I have it set up is that this piece here should stop this from sliding back and forth. But once you get it torqued down, I highly doubt if it moves. And this is the transmission jack. I'll be using it to pull out this XL80. So here's the jack setup that I have. So I have everything all hooked up to be able to take off here. And you can see the way I have it strapped on the jack here. So I'll be able to go ahead and get this thing on dropped out. All right, so I got that mug off finally. Now I'm gonna have to figure out how I'm gonna scoot him out, but I think I'm gonna tilt him down like that, slide him off, pull the jack back. Then when I put it back on, I'm gonna have to put it on that way. And then that's the flywheel. So I got the transmission job all complete now. I'm just getting ready to pump the fluid in. It took me about 12 man hours. The transmission jack helped out a lot. Without that, I wouldn't have been able to do it by myself. And the biggest thing was getting the transmission off the jack, so I didn't have the car up high enough. So what I had to do was shimmy it, slide it off the jack that way, as I showed in the video before. And then when I put it on there, what I did was sit the top of it up on like this big log. And then I put a smaller jack on the back, lifted the back of it up, and then slid the transmission jack under there like a spatula pretty much, and just shimmied it around to line it up. But pretty much it's just a process job. A lot of bolts. The nice thing with this car is I didn't have a lot of rust to take off. But there you have it. That's the 6L80 transmission replacement for the 2012 Chevy Caprice PPV 6.0.